Hello, everyone. I am Jeannie Walters, and this is another Experience Investigators webinar. We do this pretty much every Friday. So if you would like to join us, please do. Every Friday, we release either something live or recorded. If you have missed some of these in the past, we've been doing them for just about a year now. Then feel free to go to our YouTube channel, check out the archives of all the live sessions we've done. We cover a different topic around customer experience every week. We dive into your questions in these live events. So please, this is an Ask Me Anything webinar. So while we'll be covering the 5 ways leaders can accidentally sabotage their customer experience, you are welcome to join us and ask me anything about customer experience or really whatever you'd like. So as you join us here, please feel free to let us know where you're joining us from. And if you have not yet discovered, we also have a podcast. I co-host a podcast called Crack the Customer Code with Adam Toporek, a customer service expert out of Florida. And he and I have been covering lots of topics in the last 5 years. This year, this season, we have some exceptional topics I think would really interest you. We are talking about artificial intelligence and how to make sure that we approach customer experience in the most ethical ways. We've had some amazing guests. We have some coming up that you won't want to miss. So be sure that you check that out at crackthecustomercode.com. And this season, we are lucky enough to have a wonderful sponsor in Alida, A-L-I-D-A. They actually cover a lot around how to understand your customers. They have an approach about understanding the truth in what we learn from customers. So they're very well aligned with who we are as a podcast. And thanks to them, they're offering something just for our listeners and just for you for showing up here today. You can go to alida.com/CTCC. That's for Crack the Customer Code. And they are offering a Forrester report just for our listeners, again, that you can download to help you with prioritizing your customer experience efforts. I really recommend you check that out and check out the tools that are available there as well. So let's get started today with our topic. This is one of my favorite ones because who doesn't love the word sabotage? It's such a fun word to say. So as we approach this, let's go into, let me find it here. First of all, those of you who don't know me, I am Jeannie Walters. I have been doing this work for more than 20 years, focused on customer experience and how to help leaders really understand their customer experience so that they can improve business results. That's what it's all about. And so we do this through workshops and training, a lot of speaking and things like these webinars, as well as helping our clients with things like customer journey mapping and service blueprinting and some of those techniques as well. And we love hearing from you. So if you want to reach out, please reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn or all these other places, because we do really appreciate hearing from you directly. So let's get started. Let's talk about sabotage. So the question that I pose here is, are you accidentally sabotaging your customer experience? And I say this because I know that leaders don't intend to do this. They don't approach this thinking, oh, I know what we'll do to ruin our customer experience. Nothing like that. These are patterns in organizations that I see over and over that lead to some pitfalls. And I want to give us credit where credit is due here. We don't often have customer experience as part of the history of our organization like we do other business disciplines like sales or even human resources or things like that. So customer experience is usually a relatively new idea in most organizations. And that's why it's so easy to kind of make a misstep here. So today we're going to talk about 5 specific ways that leaders sometimes accidentally sabotage CX. 1, never dealing with customers. 2, over worrying about the competition. I think we have all seen that. 3rd, encouraging bad behavior. We'll talk about what that actually looks like. Keeping customer praise to yourself. This is another thing that we sometimes don't even realize we're doing. And then defining what you aren't more than what you are. And this goes for both customers, the entire marketplace, and even your employees. This is a really important one. So let's talk about the first one. One of the ironies about leadership is that the higher you go up in the organizational chart, a lot of times what that means is you are more disconnected from your customers. You aren't interacting with them directly, and you are essentially more and more distant from them. And so, a lot of leaders who have wonderful intentions have not actually interacted with a customer directly in months, sometimes years, sometimes ever, right? And so when we do this, we have to make sure that we are finding ways to connect with our customers. There are several ways to do this. Sometimes it doesn't make sense for the CEO to reach out directly to a customer. Sometimes that doesn't make sense. But leaders can still listen in on calls, they can visit the contact center, they can really get into, who are the people who are dealing with our customers directly and find them and hear their stories. I also really appreciate when leaders take the time to spend a day or two really on the front lines interacting with customers, because that's where you learn so much about your organization. Now, the reason this is considered sabotage is because if you're not dealing with customers directly, when you are looking at surveys and behavioral analytics and all those things that we recommend, then essentially you might not be connecting on that emotional level. You might not be really understanding the challenges that customers have. And so it's easy to make decisions based on assumptions rather than reality. So make sure that you are dealing directly with customers as a leader in some form, some way, on a regular basis to really hear their voice, to understand their story. Number two, over worrying about your competition. Now, this one is a little, different than what we usually talk about, but it's so important. If we are obsessed with just chasing that competitor, then there is so much opportunity in your customer's experience that you might be missing. And that includes things like really understanding who your customers are. Because if you define your customer experience based on your competition, then you're making lots of assumptions about who your customers are and how they actually connect with your brand. So make sure that when you are thinking about your customers' experience, you are focused on who are we as a brand and who do we have as customers? What's most important to them? So make sure that you're connecting those dots instead of just chasing the competition. Your customers matter more than your competitors' customers. So make sure you're focused on that. Encouraging bad behavior. This is a big one. So metrics are sometimes used as punishment. I hate to say that, but that's the truth. If we are using things like first call resolution or time on call in a contact center, for instance, people might start to assume, your employees might start to assume, well, if I spend too much time serving a customer, then that will come back to haunt me as an employee because I'm spending too much time per call. Now, of course, if it takes longer to serve the customer, that's the behavior we want to encourage. And so when you're looking at how you're communicating about the metrics, both the experiential metrics and the operational metrics, make sure you're explaining the mission behind that. Make sure you're connecting the dots. We also want to communicate positively and often about the behavior we want to see. So if we have certain things like first call resolution, we also want to praise the people who took the extra step, who escalated something, who had a sticky situation with a customer and did what they needed to do to resolve it in the right way. So make sure you're praising and you're communicating about the behavior you want, not necessarily the metrics that they feel are punitive. Number four, keeping customer praise to yourself. We do this all the time without knowing. We do this by actually collecting positive feedback and maybe only sharing it with our team, maybe only sharing it up the chain. So we get positive experience or positive customer feedback. We might put that in the reports for the C-suite and forget to share that with the team or forget to share that throughout the organization. We want everybody in the organization to really understand, why is this customer experience stuff so important and what do all these efforts lead to? And that's where, if you hear the customer story, if you get that positive feedback of somebody saying, you know what, Not only did you resolve my issue, but you made me a customer for life. That type of feedback you want to share far and wide. You want to make sure that you share that not only with your team as an example, but you really share that with the individual who made that happen, and you share that beyond your team. Make sure that you are helping everybody in your organization connect the efforts with the outcomes, and this is a great way to do that. And then this is an interesting one too, but this is essentially about defining what you aren't more than what you are. And so a lot of times when I talk to different employees in different organizations, I'll say, "What makes you special in the industry?" And they often start with what they aren't. They'll say things like, "Well, we're not like the other ones. We do things differently. We do this." That's all great as long as it's actually defined about who you are. What are you delivering? What are the expectations and experiences? How are your values aligned with your customer values? We want to make sure that employees all understand that and internalize who are we as an organization? What is our customer experience mission? What are our values and how do we deliver that? Because if they're only talking again about how that organization compares to the rest of the industry, that's a huge opportunity missed to really connect with customers on that emotional level. So to recap, these are the 5 things: never dealing with customers, over worrying about your competition. I'm sure some of you are thinking, maybe that applies to me now. Encouraging that bad behavior. Sometimes we unknowingly do that. Watch out for the metrics that your employees think are going to be punitive instead of really serving customers. Keeping customer praise to yourself and defining who you aren't more than who you are. So those are 5 things I see over and over and over when we're discussing customer experience in different organizations and when we are, really trying to transform a culture within an organization as well. So keep an eye out for these subtle sabotaging ways. And one thing to consider is that there is this natural friction which helps drive business forward, frankly, but organizational goals like profit margin and even efficiency, when we talk about efficiency inside our organizations, sometimes we make those decisions at the sacrifice of a great customer experience. We have to kind of run both lanes in a parallel way. We have to consider both sides of that coin all the time. Is this good for the organization? And is this good for our customer experience? And if we can't say yes to both of those things, then we need to take a step back and revisit, how else can we do this? What is choice 3? I like to say, because sometimes we assume there are only 2 choices. There's always a third choice. So as you approach your customer experience strategy, as you approach these things, make sure you're watching out for this friction and these 5 things that might be sabotaging your customer experience kind of from the inside out. So at this point, I would love to take your questions. I would love to hear what you're grappling with, what you think is sabotage. I'm sure you have great ideas as well. So as always, we have David with us today to moderate our questions. I didn't introduce you in the beginning. I jumped right in.
It's a surprise. I'm just here midway through. Nobody expected it. It's very exciting.
Yes. Well, we're trying new things here on our webinar.
Yeah.
So how about some questions?
Yeah, I want to highlight a couple comments. I want to welcome John, who's joining us, a longtime viewer, first-time commenter. We'll get to one of his questions in a moment. I want to highlight some comments. Eric has had a bunch of great comments. One of them around metrics. Employees who are measured on metrics instead of customer-centric behaviors are more likely to leave. Which is absolutely true.
Yep.
And I think that leads in nicely to a question that we had that came in earlier from email this week around employee metrics. So let's jump into that first. So the question is, I think using employee metrics that are easy to game is common because they're easy to implement. It's easier to look at a rating and tell if it's high or low. It would be nice to have metrics that are more accurate and harder for employees to game, but it takes a lot of extra effort. Can it be done without requiring so much extra effort and resources?
Can it be done without requiring And you know what? I'm going to have you say the whole thing because I got really
Yeah.
excited. I saw Eric Ullman here. So hi, Eric. And then my friend Nicole is here. So I just want to say hi to a few people. So, but can you say the last part of the question again, please?
Yeah, I think the question, really the heart of the question is, are there ways that we can implement employee assessments and metrics beyond the simple ones that are easy to game without having to put forth a lot of extra effort to
Mhm.
get into the nuance of,
Yeah.
what is the actual experience behind those metrics?
Yeah. I think the part that I think we overlook a lot is individual coaching. And what I mean by that is sometimes, especially in contact centers, frankly, we get really obsessed with what are the metrics saying in general, and then we kind of pull people together in the team and say this number went up, this number went down, do a better job, and we don't give a lot of direction around that. And so the patterns don't change. People kind of go back to what they were doing because they're not given that individual support. And what I love, and we have so many great tools now that now you can get to that individual real time level. And so one of the things I've seen that I really appreciate is that, and I'll even praise a brand here. Apple does this really well. Apple has a way that they can connect individually. Okay, we noticed that this last customer service call or this last even in-store interaction, um, the post feedback went down a little bit with that individual customer. Well, let's go talk to that person. Let's go talk to the store rep. Let's go talk to our customer service rep and say, what happened there? We everything else is great today. This one seemed like it didn't go well. Tell me about that. How can we approach that differently next time? Are there things that maybe are within the overall processes and systems that we need to provide feedback for? So getting to that level can go so far, and it doesn't take the dramatic tools and technology every time. I mean, anybody who's been in a contact center, their, managers are walking around sometimes and just hearing things, or you're seeing kind of real time what's happening. I love when leaders will connect those dots in real time because then you see improvement right away and you don't have to wait for the metrics. And then people understand that the metrics are not about the number, they're about improving things. Because sometimes there is this mythology that happens in organizations too. Like I saw one organization that they were not even using time on call. That was not one of the metrics they were using. And yet there was this myth that they were using that and they were being watched in this way. And so all of a sudden, people started shortening the calls. Customers started getting upset. They were getting hung up on, which is very common when you have that metric and use it in a punitive way. And so when that was all happening, they had to figure out, why is this happening? We're not even using this metric. And so I think looking at what is the purpose of these metrics? If we are using things like first call resolution, that's not necessarily about the employees. That's about what training do they need? What knowledge bases do they need at their fingertips? How can we support them in order to achieve that goal for our customers? So really connecting those dots, I think that's the part that is often skipped. It's way too easy to look at those numbers going up and down and make assumptions. And then all of a sudden it turns into, how can we game these numbers instead of what is the purpose of tracking all of this stuff to begin with?
I love that. Let's jump to a question from Sam, and this is a big question. How would you measure success?
Ooh, love this one. Love
Yeah.
Sam just set me up. Thank you, Sam. This is one of my favorites because a lot of times with customer experience, we start with tactics because people aren't familiar with it. So they say things. And in fact, just this morning, I was emailing back and forth with somebody because she said, we need to do this, this, and this. And I had to say, okay, that's great. Why and how do we define success? So, with customer experience, a couple things happen a lot. One is we try to take on the world right away. We say, we're going to increase our net promoter score, we're going to increase retention, We're going to create a customer-centric culture. We're going to do all of these things in like, I don't know, second quarter. And it's just way too much to take on, especially if you are retrofitting this as a strategy and discipline into your organization, which most organizations are, unless you've started within the last decade or so. Most organizations did not actually include customer experience as part of their strategy. So, what I like to use is something we have called the customer experience success statement. And this is where you literally break down what are our organizational goals. And David got up the link there because we have a free workbook you can download for this. What are the organizational goals that you have to achieve? Like if you went around your organization, what are your annual goals? What are your 5-year goals? All of those like real things that have real numbers. Then you want to break that down into who are our leaders and what are they really focused on? How can we make our leaders happy? And the reason this is so important is because customer experience has a reputation of being soft skills. You know, that gives me the shivers when I hear that. But soft skills or nice to have. Like, yeah, that would be nice if we had a better customer experience, but we'll just talk about it a lot and then people will figure it out. That's not how it works. You have to put real goals, real tactics, and discipline around this in your business. And so once you figure out your organizational goals, then you figure out your leadership goals, then you break that down further and really define how do we know if we're successful? And this is where these metrics come in. This is where they support your business outcomes. So if you are trying to increase renewals, for example, you're going to back that out and say, okay, what are the points of feedback we need to collect? How do we know if we're getting closer to that number? What will that do for our business? Well, that will increase our customer lifetime value. That means more revenue. That means more profit. How can we reduce customer service calls? That's another great goal. So really breaking down what does success look like, and then using CX metrics and operational metrics to measure that success. That's what is super, super important. And the reason that we're talking about sabotage today, not just because of the Beastie Boys, but that's part of it, I'll be honest, is because we are often put into a situation as CX leaders where we have not defined that success. We have not been told exactly how CX is supposed to support the organization, and we're left to our own devices to figure it out. That's why the success statement can be so powerful. It forces you to define these things in ways that your organizational leaders will have to nod and say, yes, if we are serious about this, then we're going to invest in this in order to gain these returns. So defining success is an absolutely critical point. And ironically, we skip it a lot. We make it vague. We say things like, we're going to have an exceptional customer experience. That's not clear enough and that's not measurable. So the other thing that we have are our SMIRC goals, which we also have a downloadable for you there too. And SMIRC is for social, measurable, inspirational, relevant, and contextual. And we go through all of those in the checklist there. But that helps you actually really think about how are we defining our CX goals in a way that will work throughout your organization. So thank you. I get really excited about that one because it's so useful. It's so useful. So I encourage you to go download both those things.
Yeah, I saw you light up when that question came in.
Success. I mean, who doesn't love success?
Yeah. Let's go to a question from Saptarshi joining us on YouTube today.
Hey.
He's working as an interpreter for a patient and insurance company. And he wants to know, how can I make sure that I keep the customer experience or patient experience going from end to end and connect the dots between those touch points?
What a great question, and what an important role you're playing. So thank you for that. I think, patient experience is really interesting because we have so many different ways of approaching healthcare throughout the world, frankly. And there are so many obstacles to what you might consider a good patient experience because most patients are not necessarily like, woo, I get to go have surgery today. Yay. That's not the experience. So you're kind of starting in a negative place. And what we have to do is focus on empathy, on compassion, and to your point, Saptarshi, the end-to-end experience. What is this patient trying to do? What are we trying to do or help guide and advocate for the patient? Because sometimes a lot of patient experience is understanding, is hearing communication and making decisions with your healthcare provider, as well as with your insurance provider, folks like that. It gets very complicated. So I would say think about, where are they coming from in that moment, like on their journey? What are the most important things for them? And then as an interpreter, I think one of the things we overlook in patient experience and kind of healthcare experience in general, because we talk about patient experience a lot, but patient experience extends, right, to caretakers, to family members, to invested providers. And so when we think about where are people coming from, I think we often assume it's a little more linear than it is in healthcare, because a lot of healthcare includes trauma. And I think we have to just acknowledge that. And trauma can do weird things to us. It can make us forgetful. It can make it harder for us to hear in kind of one take what's happening. And anybody who's like gone to the emergency room for something traumatic, people come in and out and they say, "Hi, I'm nurse so and so. Hi, I'm doctor so and so. Hi, I'm the, whatever." And then somebody else might come in and say, "Hey, have you seen nurse so and so?" And you can't remember the names because you're in a point of trauma. And so I think communication in patient experience and healthcare experience in general is often seen as a checklist, and it should be more seen as kind of an ecosystem. How can we really approach this experience and reinforce the right information and reinforce that compassion and empathy that somebody needs? Because in those moments, that's what they need. And this goes for if you're dealing with an insurance company, right? Like anybody who's gone through that, you're calling about something that was already traumatic, and then there's this whole financial element too. So I think there are so many layers to patient experience in healthcare in general, but communication is one of the places where any organization can really invest a little more in trying to understand, how can we communicate in a way that is compassionate and understanding and helps somebody in that point of trauma or just not being themselves, maybe. How can we reinforce the right things for them? So the role you're playing, Saptarshi, is super important. And I know, based on all the many live sessions you've joined us for, that you have the right compassion and empathy. So they're lucky to have you.
So you talked about, giving praise to the employees who are doing well. Nicole commented on that and said, yes, you can't just focus on the negatives. This all leads into another question that we got from email this week. Do we need to evenly distribute our praise? And how do we handle those who don't get praise if they begin to feel left out?
Yeah, really interesting question. So I think sometimes this is why leaders kind of hoard praise, especially if you do have a superstar, right? Like when we're dealing directly with customers and getting that customer feedback, a lot of customer feedback includes names. And this is both good and bad sometimes, but anybody who has looked at survey results will see employee names. Those are the people who say things like, I couldn't have gotten what I needed without so and so, or I was so glad that, Sally was there to help me with my issue. She was kind and patient. And people really remember those things. And so when we are looking at, how do we praise the team versus how do we praise individuals, I think sometimes it's really easy to be like, well, Sally always does a good job, so we don't have to talk about it all the time. And I would disagree with that. I think what we need to do is start looking at these things and saying, "Wow, Sally, this went really well. Listen to this feedback, everybody. Sally, tell us about what you did. Sally, tell us about the, you know, why do you think she came back and said those things?" And hearing how Sally approaches it will help you build your best practices out. And that's what we're going for, because employees leave. They aren't there certain days, right? So we can't just rely on one employee doing the right thing. We have to make sure that whatever that employee is bringing, whatever options they're sharing, we want to put that into our best practices. We want to actually put that into code in a way and turn that into processes and systems and, help everybody understand. Anybody who's worked on a team knows that in different team meetings, sometimes you learn by hearing what somebody else did well. Now, that doesn't mean you're not good at your job. It just means that none of us are perfect and we're all learning from each other all the time. So that culture is also really important. Encouraging people to actually acknowledge each other. One of my favorite examples of this, you guys have heard me talk about CX mission, right? The importance of a customer experience mission. We have another link for that, I'm sure, because we have a workbook for that too. But one of the things I love about the CX mission idea is that it becomes shorthand for the culture. And so you can say to one another, you know what, you really lived up to our mission here. Encourage that kind of peer-to-peer recognition. There was one I worked with where they made a kind of it almost looked like the MTV Moon Man, the little trophy, because they were connected to space and all these things. So they actually had these little mini Moon Man made up, and people could pass that around to acknowledge, wow, you did great with a customer experience issue. You really lived our mission there. And by encouraging that type of culture too, you're encouraging people to catch each other doing something right. And I think a lot of times, Nicole brought up this great point. You cannot focus on the negatives all the time, because that culture then becomes one where people feel oppressed and feel like they're being watched for all the wrong reasons. If you encourage people to acknowledge the things that go right, then this is something that you can really celebrate throughout the organization. I think if somebody's on an individual level thinking, I can't believe I'm not getting praise, I can't believe Sally's getting all the praise, then that's worth exploring too. Are we neglecting people? Are we not recognizing some of the more subtle or quiet ways that they are delivering? And the reason I say that is because, in customer experience, sometimes what you get is you get a certain bias of the people who do give you feedback. There are people out there who never give you feedback. And so we have to remember that too. If you, as a leader, are really seeing somebody who's putting in the effort, who is achieving certain goals for the customers, so operationally, maybe helping them succeed, but maybe not getting that effusive feedback, you can still talk to them about those efforts and say, you know what, we recognize that a lot of people get stuck in this part of the journey. Well, David over here, he helped them in all these different ways so they were able to succeed more than other people, more than people who were doing it on their own. So we want to recognize that too. So it's really important to keep your lens out there for the right things and not just those effusive feedback things, because a lot of times what happens is, this goes back to those Discover Car commercials where it looked like the person was kind of talking to themselves. Extroverted, effusive people, they will sometimes connect more with extroverted, effusive people. And so if they are going to give praise, then you might have kind of a bias towards that. So just make sure you're really looking at the landscape of who is really serving your customers, who's helping them succeed, and then praise for a variety of things, because then people will learn from each other and best practices will be learned that you can then introduce in your training and everything else.
Thank you for using my name as one of the examples of
I know, you're
people
welcome.
receiving praise. At first, I was thinking, boy, what has Sally done that's so great? I've never even heard of her. But so thank you for evenly distributing that praise.
Well,
I don't think
I
that was
meant
the
to tell you
lesson.
about Sally, but it's been a busy week.
Wow. We'll talk after this, I guess. John, you were our first commenter today, and I don't want to make you wait any longer. So let's bring in your question. Jeannie, you can choose to confirm or deny this. It says, Jeannie, longtime listener, first-time commenter from Denver, Colorado. Is it true that you're writing a book?
Okay, I know this, John. And it is true. I'm writing a book, and it's looking like it will be out early next year. So that's the plan, and it is happening. So if you guys have feedback or want to check in on me like John does, then keep me writing, keep me honest. It's happening.
Brilliant. Well, I think that about does it for our questions this week. But of course, we do these every week, sometimes live, sometimes pre-recorded, and we'll take your questions as they come during these sessions, but also over the course of the week. If you have questions, you can reach out and get in touch with Jeannie. And Jeannie, how can people do that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. We have a whole slide for it.
Wow.
So, yeah, feel free to reach out to us. Like I said, we're here every Friday, either live or recorded. If you are looking to sign up, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, follow us here on LinkedIn. You can reach out in all these different ways. We love hearing from you. I love your questions. And, the mission of my company is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And by being here with me today, by learning, by sharing all of your brilliance with us today, you are helping us do that. So thank you so much for all you do. And go have a great week and keep fighting the good fight for your customers. All of those efforts will pay off. So thanks for being here. I'm Jeannie Walters. See you soon.